Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending the final presentation. So my name is Dennis Rand and I'm from Denmark. Usually when I presented in the US, Denmark is thought to be somewhere in Germany, so it's good to have a small presentation here. So I've been working in the security industry for the last around 20 years. Started in offense, doing a lot of penetration testing, vulnerability research, and then moved into defense on the incident response side, trying to interact these two things together. And in my spare time, whatever is left, I like to see the world through a camera. So again, this is not a guide on how to perform DDoS. This is not the goal to recommend it in any way. It's more to get some insights on some threats that I detected in a way that we might have some issues with in the future or might already have. So background on why I started this project, a little bit about the anti-DDoS solutions that is usually implemented out there in the real world, and then I'll present the tool called Max Payne, Taking Down the World. So the motivation of this actually started another place. So it actually started with me looking into why, when I was working at a SOC and doing DDoS mitigations, I was trying to figure out why was it that a lot of these DDoS attacks were actually quite easily to mitigate. So usually you could see that it was coming from like Russia and China. If you've removed that, you had like 80% of the traffic gone from the DDoS. And this is primarily amplification-based DDoS attacks. And while gathering all this data for this research to figure out was it due to the amount of vulnerable services in these areas, I came to think of a new way to actually attack companies and found out that there weren't really any useful or way to secure it. So my research has primarily been focused around UDP services. I started in the beginning of 2016 to gather information on whatever was out there, covering 20 services and 21 attack patterns. I know there is a lot more. And again, the proof of concept is around the UDP, but the mindset of it could easily be adopted to also include, what can you say, botnets and whatever is out there that can be used to perform DDoS. So see this as I'm presenting for the UDP part, but anything can go into the data set of it. So looking at how usually these kind of anti-DDoS services is implemented at corporations is that you can have like an ISP-based anti-DDoS solutions where at the ISP level they are doing the scrubbing. So in case that they detect an attack, they will then remove as much of the bad traffic as possible. Then the rest of the traffic that is still coming downwards, some companies have something locally that can try to remove the last part of it. So in that way, trying to remove the volume from the volumetric parts. So this is just the traffic correlated for the last 8 months, and it is around 12,000 or 12 million vulnerable services out there that potentially could be abused in DDoS attacks. So this is also one of the reasons that this is still being used a lot. I know that a lot of reports are saying that the IoT botnets are taking over, but there are still a lot of services out there that can actually be abused in this case. So the different UDP protocols, I've collected information on the request size, the response size in average on what I got back, what the amplification was. Was it something that was attacker controlled? So if you have like NTP mount lists, the attacker can actually bump up the traffic. We had the memcache attacks where the attackers could really bump up this volume. So it's also a matter on knowing what is more or less static, meaning from the server that is presenting this, and where the attacker can actually manipulate the size of this. The data that I have here is the pure data package. So it's not the UDP header in itself it is pulled away from this. So looking at a global view on where the problem is, it's more or less all around the world, even though America is heading off still. So make America great again. And I don't know if it's easy to see, but there is around 6,000 to 7,000 potentially vulnerable services located in Luxembourg, or at least IP addresses that are resolving to Luxembourg. So getting to the point on taking down the world with this attack. So the mindset of the Max Payne is actually to get inside the ISP-based area, or get as close to the target as possible. And thereby, you don't need the usual 1 terabit or 2 terabit, 10 terabit attacks. You actually just need to reach usually the goal of the bandwidth of whoever is being attacked. So we are back to more or less removing a lot of the perimeters that could defend us out there. So what you need to do, looking at it from the attacker's perspective, is starting to do a little more intelligence gathering prior to actually starting this attack. So it's like gathering what IP addresses is it that you're attacking, what CDRs is this around, what ASN is this inside. If you do a trace route, what is closest to this target, what route does it take? Geolocations. The reason for geolocations is that a lot of companies, when they are targeted, says, okay, where are my main company or my main business? So my main business might be in Denmark, or might be in Luxembourg. So anything outside of this area, let's just remove that to actually mitigate the attack. And then you also have peering partners. So again, the mindset is to get as close as possible. Also, if you, from the attacker's perspective, started by doing like port scans to identify if the target you're attacking actually already have something exposed. So if they have a DNS server themselves, well, a good thing could be to attack that company with DNS traffic. It could also be NTP. So trying to get into what is actually already there, because that makes it a lot harder to actually pull the good traffic from the bad traffic. So the different stages in this setup, and again, this is nothing to do with the actual attack, but the preparedness for the attack that could come. So you start by collecting a lot of data, and this is in my case where I've collected a lot of UDP data out there, but it could also be from a botnet or whatever the bad guys have in hand. Then you analyze it, trying to figure out what outcome can this have. So what kind of, again, data do I need to send compared to what I receive? Then you need to store it. Then you need to search in it whenever you want to choose a target, and afterwards actually getting the list of systems you want to use in this attack. So for the stage one, a lot of the data that I got for this was actually open sourced already. So we have like the Rapid7 open data, we have the Census, Shodan, a lot of other services are sharing information on UDP protocols out there that could be abused. But in my case, I also had some protocols that weren't being scanned. So I put up a internet-wide scan to get the data myself. So the next thing to do is to analyze it. Again, this is where you try to figure out how much do you get out of it. So in my setup, what I did was I sent a request with what I had represented as an attack request and recorded the response back. And based on that, did some analysis on it to get some idea on how much amplification in this case it would perform. All of this went into a Logstash, where one of my issues were that if I had to go over the data again, I could get duplicates. So I had to put in a unique fingerprint where I had the destination IP, port, protocol, and attack description. So I created a fingerprint of that to ensure that I had a unique identifier for the specific one. And then I enriched the data with some country codes, AS name numbers, and I removed anything from the data set that where amplification was below 2. So I needed a specific topping to actually get into it. So this gives some information that were pushed into to Elastic with the amplification factor, the sent bytes, received bytes, time in milliseconds, because I also needed to check the response, how much latency that could be in there, the protocol, the country codes, the destination IPs, port, ASN, number and name. And all of this went into the Elasticsearch. So the next thing that the bad guys can start to do with this is to actually say, or get a protocol effectiveness. How effective is this protocol, or how effective is this attack to use? So you have like the SIP protocol where you send a small amount and you don't get as much data back, so you need much more volume on the SIP parts or the SIP hosts to actually do this. Or if you have like chargen, you only send 1 byte and you get a massive, usually amount of feedback of it. Again, I know in my, we're going to say data set here, I haven't taken into comparison of how much you can manipulate the data. But this is again looking from an attacker's perspective where they can figure out how to use the least amount of volume or systems to get the task done. So in the data search, and this is where we start to get into the max pain part, is that it's like ripples in the water. You need to start as close to the target and then move your way outwards. So you get your tier 1 as close to the target, tier 2, and etc. out there. And this could as easily be added additional tiers depending on how this would be built. So for the demonstration, no animals, people, websites, networks were harmed. It's all, what can you say, based on the data set, so I haven't done any targeting attacks for it. So all of the information will be, or is already up on GitHub on this, with the proof of concept on how to use the data. I have like how the Logstash, the Elasticsearch were set up. All of the core data that I used for this research will also be published. It is already here. I'll take that at the end. So to the demonstrations of it. So in this case, I used the ENISA website. So starting from here, in the Max Pain tool that or proof of concept that I created, what I'm doing is that I tell that I want to start with a tier 2 that has a CDR 24. So this is just to figure out how to get as close as possible to the target as possible. How long backwards I need to search in time, what the minimum amplification level needs to be, and a guesstimate of how many requests I will get per second. So in this case, I've set it to 25. I want to have data extracted from a tier 1 to a tier 6, and then the target. And based on this, the tool goes into the Elastic and starts to extract information. So the first part is that it's extracting the IP address from the domain. From there on, it will look, because in this case, the IP address resolved to /24, there weren't anything directly close to the ENISA website. Since the IP address that it had here also was a /24, in the second tier, we couldn't see anything either. So now we go out to the ASN number of that IP address. And this is where it starts to get interesting. And all of these things are some of the things that Max Pain is collecting on its own during the pre-analysis. So from this ASN number, we start to get quite a lot of potentially systems that you could use. So what was also related here is that if you had like a botnet on the side, you could add this to the data set as well. So again, an estimate of the amount of traffic that you could generate if it was the 25 queries or requests per second, you would reach 1.8 gigabit per second attack at this level. So in some cases, this would actually be on the inside of the network, meaning that the ISP-based scrubber, which is usually implemented on the border, would not be effective. So now you're on the inside. So this would again go back to how much bandwidth would the potential target actually have to fill it up. So we don't need necessarily a 10 gigabit attack. So if you move outwards toward the upstreaming partners of this AES, you certainly start to reach a 7.8 gigabit per second attack potential. And this is again where a lot of the data is to get as close to the target, move outwards. The tier 5 in this setup is that it's the country code from where the IP address is located, in this case Romania. So from here I could do an attack on around 11 gigabit per second. Again, this would potentially be able to be stopped by the, what can you say, attack or the scrubbing center, but depending on where it's having their customer base, they can't necessarily filter it out. And then if that's not enough, then you have more or less the rest of the world from outside to start using in. And this is where you could potentially have a tier 6 that would be converted into having more specific protocols or something that was more related to it. So this can be adapted to whatever the attacker would see it as. So what can actually be done with this? So the issue is that I've not been able to find any technical solutions out there that exist to be able to mitigate this. So the only thing that needs to be or can be done is maybe digital hygiene, maybe starting to push some requests to your ISP to actually get them to have some, if you are buying a service from them, what are they doing on the inside of the network to actually remove some of the badness that potentially could harm you. There are the BDP ranking, there are the shadow servers data that you could potentially get your hands on, at least to ensure that you're not part of the problem if you have an ASN yourself. In some cases I saw in the data set that in Brazil you had like a service provider there that was actually having all their broadband users where they exposed SNMP on the outside of their IP addresses. I also saw in the data set that you could actually initiate a small DDoS attack from North Korea, so that would be the proof that they are bad guys. Or should we start going into much more, what can you say, drastic measurements to say that if you've been part of an attack, you end up on a block list? So we start actually to block providers that are not securing their systems. So for now, since we don't have anything, what can you say, technical to secure us, we need to get someone to start securing their systems even better. And a bad thing would be to end up like with the Memcache, where I saw that a lot of, especially VPSs, simply just blocked Memcache overall. So instead of removing the problem, they just shut it down. And potentially this could be the same thing that we're seeing. BCP 38 in relation to UDP is always a good choice. And again, trying to clean up everything as fast as possible, or avoid the problem even occurring. So big thanks actually to Rapid7, because they helped me. I pushed some information to them on some services that I would like some information on, and they gave it back to me. I had a Danish provider that allowed me to do some internet-wide scans from them. Good friend of mine, Michael Vingård, who put up with a lot of sanity checks on my thoughts. And remember, we need something done before the ice is melting. The information or the core data set of this, which is around 300 gigabyte of compressed files, raw JSON, packed JSON files can be located while you're here from the Hack.lu server, hack.lu.local, and it's the folders 2016, 17, and 18 OK that can be used, and everything else is up on GitHub, including this presentation. So that was all. Thank you.
All right. What a way to end the day. We've seen this similar result at previous Hack.lu years. Any questions to Dennis? We have one in the back.
Thank you. Oop. Hello.
This is on.
Thank you. That was terrific. I'd like to put in a plug for BCP38 because after adding rate limiting to DNS, because of course DNS servers have to answer questions, they have to be well provisioned. So blocking traffic at the DNS side is hard. I want to say that in the case of BCP38, the Internet Society is doing some good work with their MANRS, M-A-N-R-S, but we in this room could also do a lot. Audit your ISP. Make sure they are doing BCP38, and if they won't, don't buy from them. It could start with us.
Totally agreed.
More questions? Everybody's stunned and in maximum pain.
And if any questions afterwards, I'll be here the rest of the week. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dennis.